Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are really glad to have you with us today.
It's great to be here.
So today we are stripping away, nearly 400 years of myth and statues and these really dry textbook summaries to look at a life that is so chaotic, so full of violence, bad luck, and just bizarre twists that it frankly makes the fiction written by the person seem completely tame by comparison.
That's not an exaggeration at all. We are talking about Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra.
Exactly. A name that I think for most of us, myself included, when you hear Cervantes, your brain just creates this very specific, almost cartoonish shortcut.
Right. You think Don Quixote.
You think Don Quixote. You think of the windmills, the skinny guy on the horse with the wash basin on his head.
And the fat guy on the donkey. Sancho Panza.
Yes, it's the ultimate literary icon. Okay. But what actually blew my mind while going through the research for this deep dive is that the author's actual life was arguably much more insane than his book.
It is a life that reads less like a literary biography and more like a high-stakes action movie script.
Huh?
You know, the kind of studio executive would reject for being too unrealistic.
Seriously. Usually writers live in their heads.
Right.
They sit at desks. They stare out windows. But looking at Cervantes, we have pirates. We have massive naval battles that literally changed the course of European history.
Years spent in slavery, multiple prison breaks.
And then tax collection, such a letdown.
And prison. Don't forget the prison stints that came with the tax collection.
Right. Multiple times in prison. It's relentless. So our mission today is to look past the statue in the park version of this guy and try to understand how a man who spent the vast majority of his life in poverty or captivity or just total obscurity managed to, invent the modern novel.
And that isn't hyperbole. He is widely regarded as the greatest writer in the Spanish language. Don Quixote is considered the first modern novel.
And there was that poll, right?
Yes. The Norwegian Book Club polled 100 prominent authors. We're talking people like Salman Rushdie, John le Carré, Nadine Gordimer, and they voted it the best book of all time.
Of all time, not just of the century.
Of all time. It's a heavy hitter list, and that's the book they chose.
You would think a guy with that kind of resume would be a celebrity in his own time. Living in a palace, signing autographs.
You would think. But, as you said, the man who wrote it was a complete enigma. He lived his entire life on the margins.
Okay, let's start right there. The enigma of his identity. Because here's the first nugget from the sources that just stopped me in my tracks. We don't actually know what he looked like.
That is correct. It sounds impossible given his fame, but there is absolutely no authenticated contemporary portrait of Miguel de Cervantes in existence.
That is wild. Because I can picture him. I have a clear image in my head. I've seen the painting on book jackets 1,000 times. You know the one?
Oh, I know the one.
The guy with the rough collar, the goatee, looking very noble and intellectual, maybe a little weary.
You're definitely thinking of the portrait attributed to Juan de Jauregui. It is the image everyone uses. It's in textbooks, encyclopedias, everywhere.
So that's not him.
Well, the problem is modern historical analysis has shown that the names and the inscriptions on that painting were added much, much later. It is not confirmed to be him. It's more likely just a portrait of a random nobleman from the period that someone, slapped a label on later to satisfy our need to see a face.
So the face we see on the Spanish euro coins, that official currency, that's got to be based on something, right?
It is. It's based on a bust that was created in 1905.
1905.
Yes. So it's an artistic guess. It's a fabrication based on how we think he should look, based on the Jauregui portrait, which is probably not even him.
That is incredibly ironic. We have his face in our pockets. We see it on these grand statues in Madrid, but it's basically fan fiction.
It is. Now, there are other theories, of course. Some art historians look at El Greco's paintings, like the portrait of an unknown gentleman or the really famous nobleman with his hand on his chest. Oh, that's a beautiful painting.
It's a stunning painting, and people want to believe one of them is Cervantes. It would be so poetic, two geniuses of the Spanish Golden Age crossing paths on a canvas. But the Prado Museum, which houses these works, has serious doubts. They lean towards the nobleman being a specific person, the second Marquis of Montemayor. So no luck there either.
He really is a faceless author. And it's not just his face that's a bit slippery, it's his name, too. I saw in the notes that he signed his name Cervantes with a B.
Yes, Cervantes. But the printers of the time used Cervantes with a V.
Why the change?
Spelling was much more fluid back then. Standardized spelling wasn't really a thing yet in the 16th century. You pretty much wrote it how it sounded to you.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the more interesting change is the second last name, Saavedra. He added that later in life. It wasn't something he used in his early years.
So it wasn't on his birth certificate, so to speak.
Exactly. It was likely the name of a distant relative, but he adopted it purposefully. He made a choice to add it to his name. And there's a linguistic theory about that name addition that I found fascinating. It suggests it wasn't just about, family trees or sounding fancy.
Right. This is the theory from the historian Luz Lopez Baralt. She suggests that Saavedra might come from the Arabic dialect word shaibedra.
Shaibedra. And what does that mean?
It roughly translates to one-handed.
One-handed. Okay, so that is a direct reference to his war injury, which we are absolutely going to get to in a minute.
It is. It's like he adopted a nickname as his formal title. I am Miguel, the one-handed.
He's branding his trauma.
It's a compelling theory, though still debated. But if it's true, it speaks volumes about how much his physical history, his trauma, defined his identity. He literally wore his scars in his name.
Wow. And while we're on identity, we should mention there's a significant dispute about his ancestry that has become a hot topic in modern scholarship.
Yes, the theory that he was of converso origin.
Right, the converso theory. For those listening who might not be familiar with 16th century Spanish social dynamics, can you unpack what that means?
Certainly. A converso was a Jew who had converted to Catholicism, or a descendant of converted Jews. This usually happened under extreme duress during the Inquisition or the expulsion of 1492.
And this was a big deal in society at the time.
It was a massive deal. In that society, blood purity, limpeza de sangre, was a national obsession. You could be blocked from certain jobs, from social advancement, if you didn't have pure old Christian blood. It was a stain that could follow a family for generations.
So what's the evidence that Cervantes might have been hiding this kind of background?
Well, some scholars point to the fact that his father was a barber surgeon.
A barber surgeon?
Yes, and this was a profession often held by conversos because it involved, contact with blood and bodies, which was seen as unclean or undignified by the old Christian elite. Also, the Cervantes family moved around constantly, seemingly always running from debt or trying to hide their tracks.
And his father, Rodrigo, was denied an inheritance at one point because of this status.
He was. He was required to prove his lineage and failed to do so convincingly in one particular legal instance. But we have to be really careful here not to overinterpret.
How so?
As the great scholar Roberto González Echeverría points out, the evidence for the converso theory is, in his words, flimsy.
Flimsy?
Yes. Cervantes' lack of social progression and his constant financial struggles were actually quite common for Spaniards of his time, regardless of their ancestry. The economy of the Spanish Empire was surprisingly fragile for the common person.
So poverty didn't necessarily mean you were hiding a secret lineage.
It often just meant you were broke. And most people were.
It's easy to look back and try to find a sort of Da Vinci Code key to his life, but sometimes the answer is just that the economy was bad and he was unlucky.
Precisely. Though there is one personal detail he gives us himself about his identity that is quite concrete. In the preface to his novelas exemplaires, or exemplary novels, he claims to be a stutterer.
A stutterer?
Yeah.
The master of the Spanish language.
Yeah.
The guy who wrote some of the wittiest, most fluid dialogue in history.
The very same. Now, some critics think it might have just been a metaphor, for not being eloquent or quick-witted in high-stakes social situations, a kind of false modesty.
Okay.
But others take it literally because he mentions it in 3 separate writings. So picture this. The greatest voice in Spanish literature, the man who gave words to Don Quixote, may have struggled to speak fluently when he walked into a room.
That adds such a human layer to him. He could write the world, but he couldn't easily speak it. It creates this image of a man with a lot of internal pressure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move from his identity to what I called in my notes his action hero era. Because before he was a writer, he was a soldier. And he didn't leave Spain just to, see the world or on a gap year. He was running away.
He was a fugitive, plain and simple. In 1569, a warrant was issued for a Miguel de Cervantes for wounding a man named Antonio de Segura in a duel.
A duel. This is very swashbuckling already.
Yeah.
Do we know why they were dueling?
The records are a bit vague, but it likely involved honor or a woman, the classic reasons. But dueling was illegal. It was seriously frowned upon by the monarchy.
So this was a serious offense.
A very serious offense. And to escape the consequences, which, according to the warrant, could have included the loss of his right hand and 10 years of exile, he fled to Italy.
Wait. The punishment for the duel was losing his right hand.
That was the sentence prescribed in the warrant, yes.
That is immense foreshadowing, considering what happens to his other hand later.
It really is. So he runs to Rome, works briefly for a cardinal, but then he enlists. He joins the Spanish Navy infantry. And this decision placed him right in the path of one of the biggest, most catastrophic events of the 16th century.
The Battle of Lepanto.
The Battle of Lepanto.
Okay, set the scene for us. I feel like Lepanto is one of those battles that historians obsess over, but normal people tend to forget. Why was it so important?
It was a massive naval battle in October of 1571. The context is that the Ottoman Empire was expanding aggressively into the Mediterranean. They seemed unstoppable.
A real threat to Europe.
A huge threat. So in response, you had the Holy League, which was a coalition of Spain, Venice, and the papacy banding together to try and stop them. We are talking about hundreds and hundreds of galleys rowing head-to-head, crashing into each other, thousands of soldiers boarding enemy ships. It was chaos.
And it was framed as more than just a battle, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was viewed as the ultimate defense of Christendom against Ottoman expansion. The stakes felt apocalyptic.
And Cervantes is there. But he's not exactly in fighting shape when the battle starts, is he?
No, not at all. He was sick. He was suffering from malaria. He had a high fever. He was shaking, probably delirious. His officers saw the state he was in and told him to stay below deck.
Which would be the sensible thing to do. Stay in bed, you're sick, don't get killed.
It would be. But Cervantes refused. He demanded to fight. He reportedly said he would rather die fighting for God and his king than stay under cover.
Wow.
So they gave him command of a 12-man skiff.
A skiff, so that's just a small boat.
A very small boat, used to assault the massive enemy galleys from the side. It was incredibly dangerous.
That sounds like a suicide mission.
It was close to it. He was in the thick of the fighting. The casualty counts were staggering. The ship he was on, the Marquesa, had 40 dead and 120 wounded by the end of the day.
And he was one of them.
He was one of them. He was shot 3 times with an arquebus.
An arquebus, is that like an early musket?
Exactly. A very early, heavy type of gun that fired these large lead balls. He took 2 shots to the chest and 1 to the left hand.
Ouch. And that hand wound is what gave him his lifelong nickname.
El Manco de Lepanto. The one-handed man of Lepanto.
Now, was his hand actually cut off? Because that's the image I have.
That's a common misconception, probably from cartoons. It wasn't chopped off. But the shot shattered the bones and caused severe nerve damage. The hand ankylosed.
Meaning what?
It was basically frozen in a claw-like position and rendered completely useless for the rest of his life.
You would think that would be a source of trauma. I mean, he's a young man, he's maimed for life, he's in constant pain probably, but the sources say he was incredibly proud of it.
He was. For the rest of his life, he viewed that battle as a grand occasion. He didn't see himself as a victim. He saw himself as a participant in a world-changing historical moment.
He found glory in it.
He did. In his later writing, specifically Journey to Parnassus, he wrote a line that translates to, "He lost the movement of the left hand for the glory of the right."
That is a great line. It feels like it has a double meaning.
That does, doesn't it?
Is he saying he sacrificed his physical hand for the glory of his writing hand? Or for the glory of the right cause?
It is a beautiful ambiguity. He likely meant the right cause, the Christian victory at Lepanto, but as a writer, that secondary meaning is impossible to ignore. He saw his participation in that battle as the most noble moment of his life.
And his superiors agreed.
They did. Don John of Austria, the commander of the entire fleet, gave him pay increases and letters of commendation for his bravery.
So he's a war hero. He's got the wounds to prove it. He survives malaria and gunshot wounds. And he doesn't stop fighting. He keeps going on other campaigns to Corfu, Navarino, Tunis.
He stays in the service for several more years.
Eventually, in 1575, he decides it's time to go home to Spain. He's got these letters of recommendation in his pocket, and he's probably thinking he's going to get a good government job, maybe a captaincy.
He is expecting a hero's welcome. He and his brother Rodrigo board a galley called the Sol to sail from Naples back to Spain. They're crossing the Mediterranean.
And this is where the action movie script takes a very dark turn.
Indeed. As they approached the coast of Barcelona, literally within sight of the Spanish mountains, their ship was attacked by Ottoman corsairs.
There's the Barbary pirates.
The Barbary pirates operating out of North Africa.
I just can't imagine the frustration. You survive the war, you're almost home, you could probably smell the Spanish coast, and then pirates.
They were overwhelmed, captured, and taken to Algiers to be sold as slaves. But here is the cruelest twist of fate. Because Cervantes was carrying those precious letters of commendation from high-ranking figures like Don John of Austria, the pirates raided his pockets and found them, and they thought he was a very important nobleman.
Oh, no. So instead of just being a cheap laborer, they think he's a VIP.
Exactly. They put a massive price on his head. They held him for ransom instead of selling him as a common laborer. They demanded 500 gold escudos, which was a fortune his family simply did not have.
So his success as a soldier, the very thing that made him a hero, actually doomed him to a longer, more difficult captivity.
Precisely. If he had been a nobody, he might have been ransomed for a small amount or sold off quickly.
How long was he stuck in Algiers?
5 years. 5 long years.
Wow.
From 1575 to 1580.
And knowing what we know about him, this is the guy who jumped out of a sickbed to fight a war. He wasn't just sitting around waiting, was he?
Not at all. He was a troublemaker in the best possible sense of the word. He organized 4 separate escape attempts.
4 times.
4 times. He was a leader among the Christian captives. He tried to organize mass breakouts, hiding hundreds of people in caves, trying to get messages to Spanish ships. But every single attempt failed, usually due to betrayal by informers who were promised their own freedom if they snitched.
That's heartbreaking. And the family situation adds another layer of tragedy to this. His parents were back in Spain, desperately trying to raise the money to get him out.
They were. They sold off goods, they took loans. In 1577, the family had finally scraped together some money. The Trinitarian friars, who were sort of the professional ransom negotiators of the time, arrived in Algiers with the cash. But it wasn't enough for both Miguel and his brother Rodrigo. It was only enough for one.
That is a literal Sophie's Choice moment. Who goes home? Who stays?
It is absolutely heartbreaking. And Miguel insisted that his brother Rodrigo be the one who was ransomed.
Wow.
So Rodrigo went home in 1577, and Miguel had to stay behind in captivity for 3 more years, not knowing if another chance would ever come.
That is incredible selflessness. That's the kind of character depth that you usually only see in fiction. He literally gave his freedom to his brother.
It really speaks to his resilience and his personal code of honor. He always took responsibility.
So how does he finally get out?
In 1580, the Trinitarians, that religious order specifically dedicated to ransoming captives, arrived again. They managed to negotiate his release at the very, very last minute. He was literally on a ship about to be sent to Constantinople to even harsher slavery when the deal was finally struck.
Unbelievable. He was finally free to return to Madrid.
Finally.
So he comes back. He's 33 years old. He's a veteran, a former captive. He has sacrificed his hand and his youth for his country. He probably expects a parade or at least a pension. You know, here's a nice desk job. Thank you for your service.
And he gets absolutely nothing.
Nothing after all that.
The Spain he returned to was different from the one he left. It was economically struggling. His patrons, the powerful men who wrote those letters like Don John and the Duke of Sessa, were dead. His letters of commendation were basically worthless in this new political climate.
He was yesterday's news.
Completely. The court didn't care about a one-handed soldier from a battle fought a decade ago.
So the war hero becomes unemployed. That is just a harsh reality check.
He had to scramble for work. For a little while, he worked as an intelligence agent, a spy in North Africa.
A spy. Okay, add that to the resume. Soldier, slave, spy.
He was exploiting his knowledge of the region and the language, but it didn't pay well and it didn't lead to a stable career. Then he tried to settle into a domestic life that was somewhat complicated.
Right, he gets married.
He marries Catalina de Salazar Palacios, who was much younger than him. It was a fairly standard arrangement for the time, but probably not a great love match. But he also had an illegitimate daughter, Isabel, with another woman named Ana Franca.
Which he took responsibility for, right?
Yeah, he did. He acknowledged her and helped raise her. But to support this new household, he had to take jobs that were, frankly, beneath his talents and incredibly tedious.
This is what I call the boring jobs era in my notes. But looking at the details, they weren't just boring. They were dangerous in a whole different way.
He became a commissary for the royal galleons.
Which means?
Essentially a government purchasing agent. He had to travel around Andalusia requisitioning wheat and oil for the Spanish Armada.
So he was the guy knocking on villagers' doors saying, "The king needs your grain, hand it over."
Exactly.
People must have hated him.
They despised him. He was the face of the government taking their food. He was even excommunicated at one point for seizing grain from the church. And he was not a natural accountant.
He was bad with numbers.
He was constantly running into trouble with the books. He had to carry large sums of cash, which was dangerous, and keep these detailed ledgers, which he was just bad at.
And then he becomes a tax collector in 1592.
A fateful career move. He deposited the tax money he collected with a banker in Seville, who then went bankrupt and fled.
Oh, no.
And because Cervantes was responsible for those funds, he was accused of irregularities in his accounts and thrown in jail.
The irony is just painful. He survives pirates and war, only to go to jail for bad accounting.
But there is a silver lining to this incarceration. Tradition and the folklore of the town of Argamasilla de Alba says that he began writing Don Quixote while he was imprisoned in the cave of Medrano.
That's the legend, right? That in the darkest, most boring place, trapped in a cellar, he invents this colorful, insane character.
It fits the prologue of Don Quixote perfectly. He describes the book as the child of his sterile and ill-cultivated wit, born in a prison where every discomfort has its seat and every dismal noise has its habitation. He transformed his misery into satire.
So let's talk about the masterpiece, Don Quixote. He publishes part 1 in 1605. He's 58 years old.
58.
That is late in life to become a breakout star, especially in the 1600s, when life expectancy wasn't exactly high.
Extremely late. Most men of his generation were dead or retired by 58. And we have to understand what he was trying to do. He didn't set out to write some great philosophical masterpiece. He explicitly stated that his goal was to undermine the vain and empty chivalric romances that were popular at the time.
These are the superhero movies of the 16th century, right?
Exactly. Knights fighting dragons, saving damsels, magic potions, all of it. They were pure escapist fantasy.
And Cervantes looked at them and said, "What?"
He basically said, this is ridiculous. This isn't what life is like. So he wrote a satire. He created a character who reads so many of these books that he loses his mind and thinks he is a knight-errant. But the absolute brilliance of the book is in its realism.
How so? How is it different from what was already on the shelves?
He used everyday speech, the language of the common person. He portrayed the gritty, dirty, hungry reality of Spain. The inns were flea-ridden. The food was bad garlic and stale bread. The giants were just windmills. It was this radical collision of fantasy and reality that no one had ever done before.
He put a fantasy character into the real world and just watched him crash into things.
That's the perfect description. And it was a hit instantly, wasn't it?
An absolute sensation. It was the Harry Potter of its day. Within months, people were dressing up as Don Quixote and Sancho Panza at masquerade balls. It was a first viral literary hit.
But financially, it didn't make him rich.
Of course not. Why would it?
He sold the rights to the publisher for a flat fee. That was standard practice then. But it meant he didn't see the long-term royalties that we think of today. He was famous, but still struggling to pay the rent.
He creates the Mickey Mouse of the 17th century and sells it for peanuts. And then comes the drama of the sequel. Because he promised a part 2 at the end of part 1, but he dragged his feet.
He did. For 10 years. He was busy writing other things, or maybe he was just procrastinating. And this delay led to one of the most bizarre episodes in all of literary history. In 1614, an unauthorized sequel appeared.
So somebody else wrote part 2, like fan fiction gone wrong.
Exactly. It was published under the name Alonso Fernández de Avellaneda, which was likely a pseudonym. It was a fake sequel. And it was nasty. It insulted Cervantes personally in the preface, calling him old, maimed, and jealous.
That is just low, mocking the war hero for being maimed. That must have lit a fire under him.
It certainly seems to have. It likely spurred him to finally finish the real part 2, which came out in 1615. And in the real part 2, Cervantes pulls a move that is pure genius. He actually has his characters acknowledge the fake book.
No way. Inside the story itself.
Don Quixote hears people talking about this fake book and criticizes it. He meets characters who have read the false history of his adventures. He even changes his travel plans specifically to prove the fake book wrong.
Oh.
The fake book said he went to Zaragoza for a tournament. So, in the real part 2, the real Quixote decides to go to Barcelona instead, just despite the other author. It's incredibly meta.
He broke the fourth wall in 1615. That is just mind-blowing.
And critics often note that part 2 is different from part 1. Part 1 is more comic, more slapstick. Part 2 is more sophisticated, it's more philosophical. It has a much greater depth of characterization.
It really transforms from a simple satire into a profound study of friendship and loyalty.
Yes. The relationship between Quixote and Sancho is the heart of it. They start as total opposites. the dreamer and the realist, but they rub off on each other over the course of the journey.
The Mexican author Carlos Fuentes put it well. He said Cervantes sits in the tradition of Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, and Joyce. He created a universe that contains all of humanity. Sancho becomes more quixotized, more dreamy, and Quixote becomes more grounded, more Sanchified.
It's a beautiful arc where they essentially exchange souls.
It's amazing to think that while he was writing this world-changing book, he was still just living a fairly normal, difficult life. And he wasn't only writing Quixote, we should touch on his other works, because he really wanted to be known for more than just the crazy knight.
He did. He wanted to be seen as a serious intellectual. In 1613, he published the Novelas Exemplares, or exemplary novels. This is a collection of 12 short stories.
And he was very proud of them, right?
Very. He claimed he was the first to write original novels, or novellas, in Spanish, rather than just translating Italian ones. And there's a fascinating connection to Sigmund Freud here that I found in the notes.
Oh, this is a deep cut. I loved this.
Yes. Freud actually learned Spanish specifically so he could read these stories in the original. He was obsessed with one of them called The Dialogue of the Dogs, El Coloquio de los Perros.
The Dialogue of the Dogs.
It's a story where two dogs, Scipion and Berganza, suddenly gain the ability to speak one night, and they share their life stories outside a hospital in Valladolid. Freud loved it so much that he and a friend used those dogs' names as pen names in their letters to each other.
That is incredible. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, role-playing as a talking dog from a Cervantes story.
It makes sense if you think about it, though. It's the talking cure. Two beings sitting down and unpacking their trauma through speech. It just shows the reach of Cervantes' influence. He was influencing psychology centuries before it even existed as a field.
But not everything he wrote was a hit, we have to be honest. His poetry was
mediocre.
Right.
He tried very hard to be a great poet. He wrote Journey to Parnassus, which is basically him reviewing all the other poets of his day. But his own verse never achieved the heights of his prose. It was often considered clumsy.
And in theater, he was completely overshadowed by Lope de Vega.
Lope de Vega was the blockbuster hitmaker of the time.
He was the Spielberg.
Exactly. Lope was prolific. He wrote hundreds and hundreds of plays. He was popular and he was rich. He was the rock star. Cervantes wrote plays like La Numancia and The Judge of the Divorces, but they just couldn't compete with Lope's popularity. Cervantes was always the underdog, even in his own time.
It seems like he was always fighting uphill. Which brings us to the end of his life. He dies in April of 1616.
Yes, and he wrote until the very end. His last work, The Travails of Persiles and Sigismunda, was completed just days before his death. The prologue to that book is a very moving farewell to life.
Do we know what he died of?
The symptoms he described in his letters, intense thirst, dropsy, or edema, strongly suggest he had type 2 diabetes, which was completely untreatable at the time.
Now, there's that famous piece of trivia that Shakespeare and Cervantes died on the same day, April 23rd, 1616.
It is a famous coincidence, and it's why April 23rd is now World Book Day. But it is technically not true.
Okay, burst the bubble for us. Why isn't it true?
Well, they did both die in 1616, and the date recorded for both was April 23rd, or close to it. Cervantes died on the 22nd and was buried on the 23rd. However, Spain was using the Gregorian calendar, the modern calendar we use now. England was still on the old Julian calendar.
So they were actually days apart in real time.
Roughly 10 days apart. If Shakespeare died on April 23rd Julian, that was May 3rd on the Gregorian calendar. But the symbolic connection remains powerful. The two giants of Western literature leaving the stage at almost the same moment.
Even in death, Cervantes couldn't stop the plot twists.
Yeah.
Because for a long, long time, we lost him. Literally.
We did. He was buried in the convent of the Barefoot Trinitarians in Madrid. This was fitting, as the Trinitarians were the order who ransomed him from the pirates. He wanted to be close to them out of gratitude.
But the convent was rebuilt.
Exactly. During a major rebuilding of the convent in 1673, his remains were moved and effectively lost in the shuffle of bones in the crypt. For centuries, nobody knew exactly where the greatest Spanish writer was buried.
Lost for centuries. Until very recently.
Until 2015, a team of forensic anthropologists led by Francisco Echeverria launched a search. It was like a CSI episode. They used ground-penetrating radar and infrared cameras in the convent crypt. They were scanning walls, looking into these ancient niches.
And this is where the action hero backstory comes back to save the day. Because how do you identify a skeleton from 400 years ago when you don't know his face looked like? You can't match it to a photo.
You look for the war wounds. They weren't looking for a face. They were looking for a biography written on the bones. They needed to find the remains of a man of a certain age with atrophy in the left hand and gunshot wounds to the chest.
The injuries from Lepanto, the glory of the right that cost him the left.
Exactly. And they found fragments of a wooden board with the letters MC written in metal tacks. And inside that casket, they found bones that matched that exact description. The sternum showed signs of trauma consistent with an arquebus shot, and the hand bones showed the specific atrophy consistent with his injury.
Wow.
The very wounds he was so proud of were the key to finding him again 4 centuries later.
That is poetic justice. If he hadn't fought at Lepanto, if he hadn't been wounded, we might never have been able to identify his body.
It's incredible. In June of 2015, he was formally reburied with a public ceremony. He finally got his moment of recognition.
So we've unpacked the man behind the myth. We've got the soldier, the slave, the spy, the tax collector, the prisoner, and finally, the literary genius.
What is the takeaway here? Why does Cervantes still matter, aside from being the answer to a trivia question or a homework assignment?
I think he matters because he was the ultimate observer. He saw humanity at its absolute extremes, the heroism of battle, the despair of slavery, the mundane corruption of tax collecting. He saw kings and he saw convicts. And he took all of that and poured it into a book that asks the most fundamental question: what is reality?
Is it the windmills or is it the giants?
Exactly. He taught us that we all construct our own narratives. We all have a bit of Quixote in us, tilting at windmills and dreaming of something better, and a bit of Sancho, just wanting a good meal and a safe bed. He captured the fundamental duality of the human spirit.
And he did it with humor and empathy.
Yes. Despite having a life that could have easily made him bitter and cynical, he chose comedy. He chose to laugh.
He chose comedy over cynicism. That's a powerful choice.
It is, and that is why he endures. He laughs with us, not at us. It really is an incredible story. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We spent a lot of time talking about how we don't know Cervantes' face. We have no photo, no confirmed painting. If he walked into this room right now, we wouldn't recognize him.
True. He would be a total stranger.
But if a tall, skinny man with a wash basin on his head and a short, round guy on a donkey walked in, every single person on the planet would recognize them instantly.
Don Quixote and Sancho Panza.
Exactly. The final irony is that the man whose face is lost to history created characters who are more visually real and recognizable to us than he ever was. Maybe that was his ultimate success. The fiction became more real than the creator.
A perfect Cervantine paradox.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into Miguel de Cervantes. We'll see you next time.